Hello, and welcome to The Confident Commit, the podcast for anyone who wants to join the conversation on how to deliver software better and faster.
If you're looking to build a trusted ship, tune in, let's confidently commit.
I'm your host, Rob Zuber, CTO of CircleCI, the industry leader for all things CI and CD. Today, I'm joined by Tara Hernandez, Vice President of Developer Productivity at MongoDB. Tara, thanks so much for joining me.
I'm always pleased to hang out with you, Rob.
I'm so excited. This is, I don't even know what number this is in like strings of conversations that we've had, but I'm excited to be doing it here. It's always been a blast to hang out and chat. And, you know, developer productivity, absolutely something that I care about deeply, that folks at CircleCI care about deeply. Clearly you care about deeply. We've had many, many conversations about it. So, excited to just jump into it. And we sort of kicked this off a while back and we were having a discussion. And you said that there was something that you were spending a lot of time thinking about and that was sort of top of mind for you around, you know, in this umbrella, and that was build versus buy, without a lot of additional detail, if I recall, in terms of what you shared. But what is it about that topic that's so important to you right now or in 2025?
Yeah, it's funny because at the time when you reached out, it was like really top of mind because of a bunch of frustrations, right? And, you know, I'm at MongoDB. We create a NoSQL database, document database, and all of the ecosystem tools around that. And it's been around for a long time. And it had some really unique, I would say unique corporate culture around product quality. At a time when a lot of companies were still figuring out things like version control, right, and continuous integration systems, and they looked around and are like, we can't do what we want to be able to do with this thing, which is to test a distributed, NoSQL database. And so we created a bunch of proprietary tools, right, and those tools have become absolutely entrenched in our development ecosystem over the years, and as as anybody who is in this space knows, the cost of replacing them, has to go up against the cost of sustaining them. And, the build versus buy is not even, I have a problem I need to solve. How do I solve it? It's like, I've solved the problem, but now I need to resolve the problem. Right. And in many ways, it's a more expensive proposition because it's going to be fundamentally disruptive to our day to day. Right. And it's really interesting to think about, hey, what do we do here? What's our roadmap? What are we not able to take advantages with emerging technologies? And everybody's talking about AI. If you have a bunch of proprietary systems, it's like, oh, well, how do you integrate into them, right? That's, your models don't know about these things. There's no connectors. There's none of the ecosystem that would allow you to incorporate this new stuff very easily. And so that's kind of where that frustration came from. I think along the way, as you try to do new things, like maybe you are going from data center to cloud, or you're on cloud and now you need to go to multiple clouds. And, what are all of the decisions that you might have made 3, 5, 10 years ago that are now inhibiting that, right? And how do you extricate yourself? So that was my rant.
Yeah. It's something like, unsurprisingly, as a SaaS provider of tools, I feel like fewer people write their own databases maybe than some other tools, but you never know. People do it.
Yeah, thankfully, I don't think that's a usual problem for people to have.
Right. So it's more like, how do I go about buying? Am I buying it in the cloud? Am I buying it as a piece of software or something? But we spend a lot of time thinking about build versus buy decisions for ourselves, but also for our customers. But that, like, how entrenched am I in a moment of significant pivots, right? You raised AI in there, like almost everything we're doing is changing in some way. And now I'm responsible for the roadmaps of all these internal tools that are not built for that eventuality, as well as my own product that I'm trying to get out into the market and sort of support through that eventuality. So it's something that I don't think people do a great job of build versus buy. I'll just leave it at that, right? Like as engineers, anything is possible, right? Like the constraints that we have in software are very low. Right, a low number of constraints, or however you would describe that. I have an editor or an IDE, and actually, it's a thing that. We said we'd probably end up in AI. Like, it didn't take very long. Like,
nope.
that perspective, oh wait, I can just get a LLM to build me anything I need, therefore I don't need to buy anything, is like the absolute extreme. I've heard this, by the way, the absolute extreme of there's zero cost to maintaining and sustaining the thing that I've built, right? Which is just like, oh, I get to spit out all the tools that I need. That is probably not going to end. That is an absolute extreme of just like, let's build everything because it's so cheap to build things now. Whereas the real cost, is in the maintenance and the
I was going to say, good luck
ownership.
With that. And it's not even that cheap to do that, right? I mean, the AI space, to put not too fine a point at it, has really been people assembling large piles of money and then lighting them on fire over and over again, right? And that model only sustains for so long. And now we're starting to see vendors saying, okay, if you want to use these models, now we're going to start charging you because we're no longer going to pay for your compute, right?
Yeah.
And then the other, I think, that is not necessarily completely common in the industry that companies like MongoDB have to deal with is the dogfooding aspect, right? Like our proprietary CI system that we wrote, over a decade ago, that you made fun of me about, which, fair.
Gently
made fun. We use MongoDB. Right. And we actually recently, my team published a blog talking about our dog food process, and, that we got a lot more aggressive about using, RC builds of upcoming releases and being a legitimate high volume customer of our own product. And we were catching stuff that that are really almost impossible to catch in synthetic testing. And we use a lot of things like fuzzers and stuff like that to try and replicate, customer workloads as much as we can. But nothing beats, production and testing, right? That's as Charity Majors likes to say, So test and production or live a lie. That, and I think that constitutes another element of when you talk about build versus buy. Like if I were to take, and I'm not about to, for the record, in case any of my employees are listening going, what is she saying? But I were going to say, we're going to take all of our infrastructure and we're going to replace it with, off the shelf stuff or SaaS stuff. Right. Yeah. We would lose, I think, a really valuable opportunity to have a different conversation. Right. And I think it's really interesting how much, things are interconnected, right? We talk in leadership, a lot of times we worry about silos, for example. It's like, oh, well, organizationally, are we optimally set up so that we are as cross-functional and collaborative as possible? And as we know, this is an intractable problem. No matter what you do, it's wrong, right? Yeah. But there's other elements of siloization, like between a collective, the collective technical arm of an organization, which could also include not just product development, but like customer service engineers or sales engineers, right? And the marketing people or financial services, right? And when we dog food, we are dog fooding MongoDB, but we're also dog fooding Atlas, which is our SaaS service. And that has a budget implication. It's like, okay, well, I have to go put in my budget. What are my Atlas credits as an internal consumer, right? And so it's like, there's this whole, like I can really sort of spiral and start to kind of like pull on all of the threads of what are the implications of build versus buy, and what are the trade-offs, right? And so now, right, I'm kind of relieved. Okay, good. We have an announcement that went out. By the way, I'm not in marketing or sales. I just commented because it's actually something we're thinking about. It's like, okay, we have our evergreen system, CI system that's built on top of MongoDB, and we generate. I think we estimated, I think I told you this, it's like 10 engineer years of compute a day when this thing is running full bore. Like it is an immense amount of testing compute, right? And so we're like, okay, well, that's generating an immense amount of data, right? And we spend a lot of time figuring out how do we organize that data in ways so, structured logs, trace events, leveraging spans to follow code paths, like all these different things. We're like, okay, we have a product, vector search in Atlas, and we just acquired a company that does embeddings that does cool math on your natural language processing. And I was like, okay, all right, one, dog food, like we're being good citizens, but two, like, could this actually solve a really like important problem, like reduce the the cycle time for debuggability of a test failure, or in our case, maybe thousands of test failures, right, that are happening. So it's really interesting. Like, is there a product, like if I were to come to you, Rob, and say, hey, can CircleCI do this? And you'd probably look at me like, why would you do that? What kind of crazy thing are you doing? Right. And that gets into bespokeability, right?
Well, I will say we're super fascinated by, and like one of the first things that we experimented with as we were looking at integrating, LLM capabilities into the product was actually that error. We call it the error summarizer. But like, oh, you have an error. Here's what you should probably do to try to fix it, right? And looking at that, like that turns into, can we just fix it for you? Like if we know what the solution is to the bug or to the thing that just failed, right? With some guidance, don't change the tests, change the code to make the tests work, right? Can we just solve it, right? And can we then accelerate delivery? Because, there's ideally your tests are written right now. That's trusting that your tests are good, which is that's an important thing to establish. But if I was going to change one thing between the test and the code, I'd probably change the code, assuming that your tests are accurate. So then making the decision about whether I should do that or not, like all of that is a super interesting application. I mean, you're talking about vectors and embedding specifically, but that's typically something that you take to then give context to a lookup, right?
Right. So we would have some kind of, maybe there's a foundation model and then we do some kind of thing on top of it, and then there's a RAG and then exactly. I mean, going back to what you were saying earlier, like, does AI actually fundamentally change the build versus buy? What does it even mean to build versus buy? What are you actually buying or building? Right. And I think that's a really interesting element as well.
Yeah. Well, I like it because it's a little like, we often use this expression undifferentiated heavy lifting, right? Meaning there's all these things that we do inside of organizations that are just not unique to us. They're, if we did domain modeling, they'd be like supporting domains or whatever. Like they're just, of course we have to have that. My favorite example is like Stripe, right? We use Stripe for charging. Nobody chooses CircleCI based on who processes our credit cards. Like if it was super janky, they might not choose us, but it's not the thing that gets people to the front door. Right. And so of course we want to use someone who's got this sorted. That's what they think about all day, every day. And they just go do that thing. But there are nuanced spaces, like with the, to your point, like if I'm integrating my own product and taking advantage of that in all these different ways, does that provide more value than just the fact that I'm sort of running this process all day, right? So, I mean,
it's a math problem I keep thinking about, and I do not know what the math is.
It's complex. Yeah. Well, you should think about. I mean, the key point is to the point of building, again, engineers, we're just like, it's free to build stuff. It's totally not free. It's not free to build it in the first place. It's not free to run it. It's not free to maintain it. All those things matter. And then, but there are also upsides, right? We might be learning something. We might be doing something. We might be extracting some value here. But if you haven't at least done the math in some form, and you're just like, let's build a thing, like you're not evaluating the options that are really available to you. And I think now, right? Like, as I was thinking about this, it was like most of our systems, of course, like as a fundamental database, probably not necessarily true, but when you're running Atlas, it's not like, cool, let's build chips, right? Like at some point,
it's like
you're well below the threshold of what you're going to think about doing, right? And so it seems like we're actually stringing together different kinds of buy decisions, right? Like we might use OSS libraries, we might third-party SaaS providers, cloud infrastructure, our own infrastructure. Like buy is not just one dimension anymore. So is there like a buy versus buy? I don't know what to call it.
I was just having this conversation. Yeah, I was just having this exact conversation actually with somebody else, and it came out of the standards discussion, right? I'm like, so one of the things that is under my remit is security infrastructure. Right. So we're not the security engineers doing code analysis, but we're incorporating the tools that those people say, okay, we want these to be running in the pipeline. And I said, and what I have learned is like, okay, I don't care what tool we use, y'all, like pick whatever tool and we'll incorporate it, except for the love of God, make sure it speaks serif. Right. Because I want to be able to say that we can, pick a tool and not have to completely redo whatever integrations, because again, nobody is writing connectors for our proprietary CI system. Right? So it's like, I want to be able to write our connectors that speak serif and call it a day. Right. Yeah. And so standards, I think, are now a thing that you buy into. Right. It used to be back in the day, remember the bad old days, well, if you go really back, the bad old days of the Unix wars, it's like you were buying into Spark chips, ergo you were running Sonos or Solaris, or you bought into whatever the hell SGI was running, or IBM, right? And then it was like, okay, nobody wants to do that anymore. Linux, thank you. Let's do that mostly in the Unix world. Of course, now we've got ARM versus Intel, so then right, so that becomes a thing. But it's like, okay, thinking about the early days of containers, Docker suddenly has made containers cool. And there was like Mesosphere early on, and then Docker Swarm, and then ECS came out, and and then finally somebody at Google read the tea leaves correctly and were like, hey, we're going to make Kubernetes win. And they went off and talked to the Linux Foundation and, CNCF, and here we are. And so Kubernetes has largely won that argument.
Yeah.
Security, Seraph is a standard, but I don't know if it's one, right? And in the AI space, like, I don't even know what it means to win in that space. So it's like, so there's not really, I mean, maybe you could say, well, we're leaning more Anthropic, or we're leaning more OpenAI, or like, I don't know, but it's like that there's the buy there is to me feels more scary, because you don't want to lock in on the wrong choice. Right.
Well, that's interesting, because I was just thinking the other direction. The interface that you're committing to is submitting some English or whatever language you happen to speak, right? So like, you can kind of do that. New model comes out, you're like, let's just point our English there. Now, of course, there's like, how good are our prompts, and are they designed and sort of optimized for that? It's all like a little.
Yeah, except yes, and as we like to say on my team. Yes, on the one hand, sure. But on the other hand, like, I think many people, particularly people who have APIs as part of their product offering, have discovered that not all models are equal. And in fact, many models, I'll tell a little story here. Like, we were doing some testing, I think 1.5 years ago. We're like, okay, go generate some code that would do this thing in MongoDB. One of the solutions we use generated code for a competitor's API. And so there's actually an investment that you have to try and figure out where to make for for anybody who has, developer enhancements, is like, you have to actually negotiate with the model owners to figure out what to do about their wrong data. Right. Because, and so there's like, that element was completely like, oh shoot, right now it's not about SEO anymore. Right. It's about what models have which data that the AI, when you go to Google search or wherever, popping up. And I think, I'm curious what you're seeing for that as well. It's like, what are the we used to measure, views, right, on our corporate websites for documentation, or whatever, like, oh, where are the customers? Oh, the customers don't even come to our site anymore, because the models are now providing that information, right?
I had a hilarious conversation with my son this morning. I hope he doesn't mind me repeating this and capturing it perpetuity. But I asked him something. I can't remember what it was. We were driving to. I was driving him to school, and he's 15. I asked him to look something up, and then I asked him, because I was curious, did you click on any links, or did you just read the AI summary at the top? And he said, I just read the AI summary. And I said, this is really interesting. Like, he doesn't care about any of this stuff, but this is what we talk about in the car, right? Like, that's fundamentally shifting the way that people use the internet. It's fundamentally shifting business models around search engine marketing and whatever. And like, because you're not clicking on the ads. The hilarious part was, he said there are ads on Google, which was just like such an interesting generational perspective. Like, I just click on whatever comes up. Like, I don't know. And I was like, oh my goodness, I'm a terrible parent. Like, I need to teach you how the internet works. But that, like, again, that just like fundamental shift in what people are seeing, and then where the information is coming from. Right. And in particular, one thing I've been thinking about a lot recently, we're a little off build versus buy, but it doesn't matter. It's like the time cutoff, right? Like my site from an SEM perspective or SEO perspective is being scraped constantly versus models being trained with data sets from a fixed point in time, right? Like the number of times that Claude will tell me, I only have information up until August of 2024 when I was trained or whatever, right? So then, like, if you miss that window,
you're so doomed.
What's your correction strategy, right? And so I think that's something, I mean, that's going to shift over time and maybe will become less impactful. And now you can
and that circles back to the build versus buy. If now AI is a fundamental part of the build, right?
Yeah.
Which if you ask anybody who is leveraged on this, they're like, yes, of course, right? But the same thing is true, right? If I'm telling my developers, like, go play with AI, right? Go do things and see if there are legitimate up-leveling that we can take advantage of. But they're going to have the same problem, right? And I hope that my developers are sophisticated enough compared to your son to go actually follow the links, right? And validate what they're seeing, because, their chats are being added, all the suggestions, what are they based off of? Are they actually even accurate? And we know the answer to that is that the accuracy rate is not amazing.
Yeah.
Right. And I remember you and I were at an event, and this guy was saying, all I need to do an enterprise business these days is one senior engineer and a bunch of bots. And you and I looked at each other and like, oh, let's make sure not to use whatever he's building.
Very senior engineer who can process faster than computers. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. It's so, I think if we think that what build versus buy is like, that whole conversation is fundamentally changing, we have that kind of, to overload the term, that foundational concept of, can we trust what we're building, actually becomes a bigger question, because that historically has been, we trust what we build more than we trust what we buy, right? Particularly for the developer tool space. But now that might be inverted. Can we actually trust what we build if how we're building it is on a system that is still so nascent that it is not, it's not reliable to the degree that a normal person with years of experience would be reliable?
Well, and in that description, right, we were talking about building, but we're still talking about stringing together other things to build something, right? Like,
yes,
it's like, how much of it are we buying is more like the real question, right? Like,
we're buying
the
pieces,
idea that one of us would say, you know what, I want to add some LLM backed capability to this thing that I'm building. Therefore, I'm going to build my own foundation model, right? Pretty low probability that's going to be the smart outcome, right? Just looking at the dollars that go into training one of these models, et cetera. And so you're always starting from something, right? Again, you're not going to build your own chips. You're not going to build your own hardware at this point. You're likely not going to build out a data center. Like, we're moving up the stack somewhere. And then saying, okay, now can I compose together some other pieces or put those other pieces in here? And which do I trust? And that's an interesting one. Like, I'm going to use this thing because certainly I'm not going to go build it, but I need to build the mechanisms around it to ensure that I trust the outcomes, or at least that I can guide them in a way that's going to be right for what I'm trying to build.
So we're playing around with a bunch of some of these new platforms. I think like, Glean and Agent Space, and there's a couple of others that I'm blocking on right now, but they're great, right? Conceptually, they're great. It's like, okay, you hook up your various data sources. If you got like a wikis or Google Docs or Office 365 or, maybe your bug tracking systems, and then you can start asking questions. But, one of the ongoing challenges as an industry we've always had, I remember I was talking to somebody who works at Atlassian, and I was sort of mocking them. I'm like, but the archive feature in Confluence needs to be more aggressive, like by default. Right? It's like, so we within, you think about these big foundational models that have been scraping the internet for years, and now you have, the state of the world as of 2019 or whatever. But we have that same problem even with these new tools. These new tools can help you find stuff. We're a 10-year-old company. We have 10 years worth of internal data that we're now pointing these things at and trying them out. And what we're finding is it's finding the wrong stuff faster, right? Because data curation remains the biggest challenge of AI, right? And that it's proving to be true, just as true for internal corporate data sets as it is for the wider internet. And so it's like, oh, we're getting wrong. We're still getting the wrong answer. We're just getting it more quickly. Yay.
Yeah.
and so then we have the organizational tactile, like, well, we better go and start finding all these things. Well, maybe it's now easier to find the wrong stuff and start deleting it. Maybe that's the big first win that we get from some of these new platforms.
It wouldn't be terrible, especially if you could automate the deletion, right? Just say, all right, get rid of that, get rid of that, get rid of that. I think there's a great opportunity in there. I think, of all the things, like, certainly we're not building internal data sources or whatever for, like, we use Confluence like many other companies. Also have used 5 different things over the years and therefore have data in all of them, like everybody else.
And you haven't retired any of them.
Right, exactly. And actually that's one of the things that's attractive about things like, I don't know the whole space, but Glean is an example that I know well, is the ability to just you know what, I don't actually care where it is, just get me the answer kind of thing. But I do think there's a real opportunity in sort of scoring and surfacing stuff that, giving people the opportunity to give feedback and say, hey, like this is the one that actually is right. Cause it just, that builds up over time. And like to the overall theme of developer productivity, like great, there's 5 answers to my question. And now I have to read all of them and try to figure out which one might be right is worse than if there were none. Right, because if there were none, I would just go ask somebody. When there's 5, I like read them all, and I don't know actually what I'm supposed to do.
Yeah, I mean, and so MongoDB, we still are very heavily invested in either remote or a hybrid workspace. So where do we live? We live in Slack.
Yeah.
Right. And yes, like over the years, so many times I'm like, okay, can my team provides support for our development teams, right? Like we need help with our Evergreen or Jira or this test thing, whatever. And we've been trying to build, and now with AI, like, okay, here, we bought actually Stack Exchange and tried to recreate a Stack Overflow internally. And it was a complete like wash, because the value of Stack Overflow is not the platform. The value of Stack Overflow is there's a website on the internet that has the collective wisdom of the planet's developers, right? And so it just didn't work, right? So we're like, okay, well, is there a Slack interface? Maybe that would work. But again, to the point, it's still like an extra step. But if we have, now something like a Glean or an Agent Space or whatever culling, and now we're not the thing that we're having to build is probably just that last piece, that curation piece, that scoring mechanism that allows us to specify a stack ranking hierarchy of the value of the data, right? Because that's the thing that the AI will try to do, but that, and then you get into like RAGs or some other things, and now that shifts but then we're building, right? Because we have to have people. Like if build means that there's engineers who have to spend time. Now the definition of build is maybe it's not writing code, but it's doing some other function that requires a human.
Well, it makes me think of this thing that I was thinking about before, which is this kind of in the build versus buy decision making. There's this pretty common anti-pattern that I see, or at least I think of it as an anti-pattern, which is like, okay, we found a product, but it only meets 90 or 95% of our needs. So obviously we have to build it, right? And I always think, well, how could we build the 5%? Could we tune it? Could we change our needs a little bit? And it sounds like that's a little bit what you're saying. Like, hey, it does a lot of good stuff. We just need to do this one thing, which is still better than we're going to build an entire product to cover this internal need, right?
Yeah, and I think I've seen some people talk about this recently. I'm a LinkedIn lurker, so is really kind of the future of what we do. Much more about the glue, right? Like, so does a product like table stakes now, all products need to have an API interface or similar to cover that 5 or 10%.
Yeah.
Right. And not just because, companies are like us where we have like significant amounts of internal proprietary code. Most companies don't do that anymore. But even with standards, there is still going to be some amount of, standards as far as like file format or whatever it is that's important to make it easier to connect things together. There's always going to be some piece of it that is the truly unique thing about your company or your engineering organization. And you want to be able to not have to make a feature request to the vendor that might get prioritized 3 years from now, right? You want to be able to just write some code or do a thing quickly.
Yeah, that's a great point. I think maybe it's 90%, but it has a great API. Right. This is extensible in the ways that we need.
That's
right?
awesome.
Yeah. As opposed to it's 90% and that's it. We have no way of getting this done. And then you get stuck. So then you're like, well, are there alternatives? I think is probably the better question to ask. All right. Rapid fire 2 questions. And then I want to get on to our closing segment. So rapid fire examples of a build decision that you regret and an example of a buy decision that you regret. Like you feel like maybe you should have gone the other way.
Okay, build decision. Let me start with buy decision. One of the things that we found and this is actually fairly recent. Won't name names. Don't want to get in trouble. But as we've had evolving like regulatory requirements, we have a bunch of different tools. Like we have this ginormous C++ code base for MongoDB, as many people know. and we have external contributors. And so they see this thing, and we have tools that are really C++ specific, and scanners and linters and security assessors. And then we have Go and Java and, TypeScript and all those other things. And we want to have language built tools for those that to really kind of like have the best possible solution for the ecosystem. I want one tool that will, aggregate all the reports from these different vendors that we're using. We bought these different vendors and I want one tool that will aggregate all of that stuff. So it generates one pipeline's worth of Jira tickets for our developers to say, oh, I have to go fix this thing. Right. And, turns out there were not many vendors in that space when we were looking, and we made the decision like, well, you look close enough and you're an early startup and we're going to be your marquee customer. And, we'll get you all the features that you want. And that turned out to not be a great choice.
Got it.
So we've since moved on from that vendor. And I think now that like so many new companies getting spun up all the time, that's a risk, right? Like, is this going to be the right partner for you over time?
Yeah.
I mean, the build, I can't think of a recent one, but certainly in past companies, I was guilty of any number of engineering enthusiasm of like, no, this would be really great. And back then I was, the closer I was to that hands-on, the more I got that like, yeah, this would be a really fun problem to solve. And not, and I think I routinely was not putting my business hat on enough. Things like, when we were first getting into AWS, it's like, do we really need to have this custom thing because there's an AWS service? Like, no, that's going to be too expensive. And I, at the time, the mistake I would make is, well, how expensive are you? Right? What's the trade-off on paying? If I'm paying $30,000, like $30,000 a year for this thing, I'm like, you're an engineer, you cost me $180,000 a year. Right, like I was not doing that math. So I think I probably did that a couple dozen times before I finally got a clue. Yeah,
it's so interesting that you raised that. I certainly as you said, well, if I go back a little bit, I started working backwards through my career. Like once I get to the beginning, this is all terrible build decisions, right? It's just like, that's just one after another of like, we should definitely build this and we should definitely build that. And I'll say early enough in my career, these things weren't as readily available. I mean, I've built data centers at some point, but that like the development of that business sense, right? Like you're just not exposed to it in a way. It's not part of your context or the conversations that you're having every day. And anyway, it just makes me curious about how we get people there earlier. But all right, so I want to get to this closing segment. Those are both great examples, but I want to be cognizant of your time. We've been talking a lot about this in our own, we've been having some fun with this whole notion of like what it means to be an engineer, who are the customers that we serve, et cetera. And so I've been asking guests, and I'd love your take. When did you first know you were an engineer? I will say, like, for some added context, I think most of us can look back and see the signs earlier than we actually said to ourselves, oh, I think I might be an engineer. Like, I don't think that's actually how it works, right?
Yeah. So I've told this story before, and people just laugh when I say this. I had zero intention of being an engineer. I was not one of those. We had a computer when I was in school. We had a Mac Plus. Didn't have a hard drive. We bought an extra floppy drive so that we wouldn't have to pop out the app disk in order to save, right? So that's how, that was a Mac Plus. It had a meg of memory. That was a big deal at the time. This is circa like 1980, let's call it 86, 87, somewhere in there.
Yeah, that sounds right. Yep.
So, but I went off to college. I had a Mac Plus SE, which had 2 floppy drives built in. That was like, ooh. But I was intending to be a history literature double major. And that was what I wanted to do. And my parents, I think, were concerned about my ability to, I guess, get a good job with the history literature double major. And they're like, you need to do a math or a science. And my school, UC Santa Cruz, at the time, would allow anybody who was a student to have an email address, which was unusual back then because those cost money. Which is weird to think about now in the day of like Gmail and all that stuff. But no, back then it was like AOL or CompuServe or whatever, Prodigy. Yeah. But everybody got an email. My roommate's like, let's go get an email account. I'm like, why? What do I need this for? And by having the email account, I also had access to the UCSC mainframes, and there was one mainframe, UCSCB. I still remember to this day, which any student could get on, and there were, bulletin boards and forums, and you could have a little shell and do stuff that I didn't do. I wasn't interested. But then I started to meet people who were on the mainframe, and I started looking at the forums, and I noticed that every once in a while someone would say, okay, food run, and everybody would meet at the Denny's on Ocean Street, at midnight. And I was like, oh, okay. And everybody who was there was in computer science or computer engineering. And so when my parents told me, oh, no, you cannot do your history, literature, humanities, life of the mind, I'm like, well, I don't want to do math, and I certainly don't want to do biology or chemistry, and physics scares me, and I'm not smart enough to be an astrophysicist. So I'm like, I guess I'll do computer science. At least I'll know people.
Wow. Yeah.
And that's how
Wow.
and I got my first job. That was an actual job, not be like I was a temp at a company that did video cards, but that doesn't count because I was just basically opening up the returns and then carrying them off to get fixed. Yeah. But I got my first job was an internship at Borland, which was a developer tools company that made databases and compilers. And I got an internship on their build release team. And so, and back then the build release team at Borland, we would run the builds. We would, pull out of I forget what the revision control system, something terrible, I'm sure. And we would run make the binaries, and then we would make the floppy disks. And then eventually, to my deep relief, we got into optical because the Borland C++ compiler was like something like 80 5.25-inch disks and 50 3.5-inch disks. So it took a long time to make all those disks.
Oh my gosh.
And so I wouldn't really consider that engineering. That was very kind of, it was manual rote labor. I certainly would have needed a computer science degree, but it was a job, right? And then when Borland was falling apart after Microsoft basically hired away the entirety of the Borland compiler team, which is why Microsoft Visual Studio is as good as it is. You're welcome. That was all Borland engineers. Where do I go next? I go to Netscape. Right. I have a sort of a DNA level hatred of Microsoft, given that my first two companies were sort of destroyed.
Oh my goodness.
But at Netscape, that's where I actually discovered that I was an engineer. Because here we had trying to make a commercial internet browser. Internet was just slowly coming into being a thing. And we were trying to make a browser that would run on every operating system. And like I was mentioning earlier, Linux wasn't a thing yet. That hadn't been invented. Yeah. So we were trying to run browsers on all of the old versions of, old version of Macintosh operating system, before Steve Jobs came back. So the really bad ones, Win 16, Win 95 had just come out. First 32-bit operating system, and then all of these crazy Unix operating systems on these different chipset architectures. We had a single back-end code base. And so me and my team, along with folks like Lloyd Tabb, who was our favorite genius, we invented Tinderbox, which was an early continuous integration system so we could build this single source base on. I think at one point we had 42 different types of operating systems or operating system variants, right? Because for Sun there was 3, right? There was four: Sun, SunOS, Solaris, and then SunOS and Solaris x86. So we had right,
Solaris x86,
right? So we had 42 different operating systems, completely distinct. So we needed a way, and we were making a browser, so we made it a web browser. So we had this web browser continuous integration system before Jenkins Hudson, before Martin Fowler decreed the term, right? And I'm very proud of that. But, it was embarrassing code. It was Perl, because we were all Perl hackers. It was the only thing that we could run on every system.
Exactly, but it worked.
Right, and Bugzilla, we came up with we need a web-based bug tracking system.
My goodness.
Bugzilla.
I've used Bugzilla.
Yeah, that was the coolest thing I've ever done was, when we launched Mozilla.org, we included the developer tools. It's like, let's launch them, right? Because we built them because they didn't exist. And people are still using Bugzilla to this day. I can't believe it. This thing's like almost 30 years old. It's still written in Perl.
It probably doesn't get a lot of updates.
Oh, no.
Wow.
Yeah.
I think I used it in as late as like 2008 or something like that. I mean, I was just helping out at a company that was using it. I wouldn't say that I really used it, but yeah, I remember that. Wow. The 42 operating systems though. I mean, you're still kind of in that world a little bit more than most people, but
yeah. So coming back to MongoDB, it was like this is very familiar. It's not quite the same, but we've got, Windows and Mac for our developer environments. I think we might have a couple of customers who actually run Windows in production. I don't know why you would do that, but there are some.
Yeah.
But then we've got like a bazillion different Linux versions, and we got the Intel versus ARM, and then we got, as you know, the thing that made you kind of wince at me was the IBM mainframes. And we have two architectures for that. And I'm like, gosh, it's like I've come full circle.
Right,
So,
but you ditched. I think you mentioned IRIX and AIX and like some of these
and
other
DEC and HPUX and
oh my goodness,
there was so many. But yeah, it wasn't until Netscape that I actually felt like an engineer, that I was actually solving problems by writing code. And that was, I think, one of the things that was so fun about that is because not only was I doing it and maybe not doing it great, I would not hold up any of our code as being shining examples of excellence, but it worked. You know? Well,
you know what I love about that story is, I mean, there's many things to love about it, but like we've been kind of on this, like you took apart the family radio when you were 6 to figure out how it worked and stuff. And that's like, that resonates with a lot of people. But your story also demonstrates the flip side of that, which is like, just because you didn't doesn't mean that you can't, you can't get into this and enjoy it and find like passion and excitement about the things that we do. I'm a huge fan of this book, Range. I think the author is David Epstein, but I'd have to double check that. Where he talks a lot about late bloomers, like people who try all kinds of different things and then eventually find something that's a great fit. I think this is equally interesting to sort of be off on a totally different path and then show up and be like, oh, this is super fun. I love this.
But I think for me in particular, the thing that I came to realize, because to this day, I would not consider myself a technologist in the way that we would think of a technologist, someone who's really fascinated with technology in and of itself. Right. Is kind of how I think of a technologist, like somebody who gets really like, wow, that's the coolest thing ever. It's still not that interesting to me. To me, technology is a means to an end. And why, what was cool about Netscape and why I have continued to do what I do, which is development infrastructure for the most part, like I come in, is because ultimately what I'm actually solving appeals to the humanities side of me. I'm solving people problems. How do I enable a developer to do their job better? Right? At Netscape, with a single backend, somebody who was running on IRIX, in fact, routinely, Brendan Ike, I think he was an IRIX guy, like he would check in stuff for the early versions of what became JavaScript, right? And he would break 90% of the rest of the platforms. So we developed our system out of desperation to make it so that Brendan would know, dude, you just broke the build, right? And other people would say, oh, Brendan just broke the build. Nobody sync, now. And now to this day, like Evergreen in and of itself is a cool tool. I have a lot of engineers who work on it. It does a lot of really cool stuff. Like I said, it does unbelievable amounts of volume for a company that's not Google or Amazon or Microsoft, whatever, right? Yeah. But at the end of the day, Evergreen itself is not the cool thing. The fact that Evergreen is enabling our product teams to have a high quality product with confidence because of the system, right? Yeah. And when we bring in AI, the AI is an interesting in and of itself. It's interesting because maybe we're going to make it so that the debug time, our MTTR for debugging, right, will go down, or for production will go down. And so once I made that understanding, I still don't I feel like I'm engineer adjacent. I'm a people engineer, maybe is another way of looking at it. But I think what's cool about this industry is it doesn't matter. Yeah. Right. All of these different ways of thinking about it are all valid. Right. Yeah. And all drive innovation. And the thing that kind of annoys me, to be honest, makes me kind of cast aspersions on my parents in hindsight, is the number of people I have met in the industry who have English major degrees or history degrees or not computer science degrees, even now, is still very high.
That's right.
And it makes me so happy.
See, parents, I could have pursued my passion and still ended up here.
Yep.
That is so funny.
And now we're saying AI, you don't need a computer science to do AI stuff. You actually need to be a good prompt engineer. In fact, maybe the humanities people are going to be better at it because we're better. They're going to be better at the whole prompt thing. Yeah.
Trying to give instructions in plain English that people will actually be able to follow. Could be.
I don't know. Well, it'll be interesting to see what happens.
Right. I want very clear documented syntax and a formal grammar, not English. English is definitely my third language or something. Yes. Spoken language is still my first, just to be clear. All right. Well, I thank you so much. This has been amazing. I love all of your perspectives on all of this stuff. Thanks to everyone who's listening. If you want to us to talk to someone in particular or talk about something in particular, I guess find me on LinkedIn. I got to update my script because it still says find us on Twitter. And I guess we know when that was written. Blue Sky. I don't even know where people are anymore. But anyway, find us, tell us, just comment on.
Just ask
Spotify.
the AI to find Rob Zuber.
That's exactly right. The AI probably knows where I am more than I do. And subscribe on your podcast provider of choice. Tara, thank you again. This was absolutely amazing.
Rob, it is always a pleasure to hang with you. I will do it anytime.
Amazing.